My life is like a neatly laced shoe, everything is holding up, everything is right, but it has lost its luster from long wear. I have a husband. A good one. Reliable. The kind of man a man should be, so that you can live with him for dozens of years without any major upheavals. We were different once. Fun, passionate, spontaneous. But the years have erased the sharpness of our feelings, turning them into a smooth, almost invisible line. Now our evenings look the same. He watches TV, sometimes says something about work, about politics, about changing the oil in the car. I nod, smile, ask if he wants tea. And him? He never asks what I want. I've learned to play this family harmony game. We don't fight, we don't even annoy each other. It's just, we're two people under one roof, familiar to each other, like old furniture. Everything is predictable, safe, like the breakfast of oatmeal I make him every morning. But sometimes at night, when he's asleep, I lie staring at the ceiling, and I get this strange feeling that something is missing. It's like there's an emptiness in me that no one notices, not even me. I could call it loneliness, but it's more like thirst, the same kind of thirst that makes people do rash things. And then I can't help but wonder, what would happen if they wanted me again? Real, without habit, without years of living together, without commitment. But they're just thoughts. Aren't they? Then why do they make you feel so hot inside? I've always thought of myself as a sensible woman. Someone who could separate fantasy from reality, desire from the acceptable. But I guess I just thought I was. He came into my life unexpectedly, but so easily, as if he was always meant to be there. Artyom is my daughter's husband. Young, confident, with that relaxed smile that makes even the most proper women involuntarily fix their hair. When Lyra brought him to our house for the first time, I noticed his eyes right away, warm, brown, a little sly. He was so alive. There was a spark in him, the same spark that had once flared between my husband and me, but had long since faded. At first I treated him simply as a son-in-law. We got along well, he was always helping around the house, joking, bringing a lightness to the kitchen that hadn't been there for years. But one day something changed. That evening I was washing dishes after dinner. Lyra had gone out on business, my husband had fallen asleep in front of the TV, and Artyom was lingering in the kitchen. "You shouldn't work so hard," he said, taking the plate from me and rubbing it with a sponge. "You have such beautiful hands, it would be a shame to ruin the skin." I laughed, but for some reason I felt a warmth spill inside. "I wish my husband thought so," I said with a slight irony, shaking the water droplets off my fingers. Artyom kept his eyes on me. "Does he even think so?" I opened my mouth to say something sarcastic, but suddenly realized I had nothing to say. After that incident, I began to notice his looks. They weren't just respectful, they were different. Greedy, appraising, slightly mocking, as if he knew something about me that I hadn't realized. And then the little things started happening. He'd keep his hand on my back a little longer than he should. He'd walk by and accidentally touch my shoulder in a way that sent shivers down my spine. "You should be at the movies, not in the kitchen," he grinned once when I came to visit in my new dress. "You're too pretty to hide at home." I tried to brush it off, but my heart was already beating faster. What was that? Flirting? Just words? Or was I just imagining it? I should have set a boundary. I should have cut it off right away, but I didn't. Because he made me feel alive again. And something told me it was only going to get harder from here. Let's pause for a moment. Write in the comments where you hear this story from, whether something similar has happened to you or perhaps you have witnessed similar situations. Share your thoughts, it's always interesting. And of course, if you like this story, subscribe so you don't miss the sequel. And now, moving on. I swore to myself I had it under control. It's just a flirtation, a game that means nothing. I'm a smart woman, I'm not a silly girl who throws herself into the deep end because of a few pretty words. But something cracked inside me. I began to look forward to our meetings. Waiting for him to casually touch my arm, to stare at me a little longer than he should. I caught myself dressing a little more carefully when I knew he'd be around. I chose a dress that emphasized my waist, put on perfume with a thin trail, not flashy, but enough for him to notice. And he noticed. One day we found ourselves alone. Lyra was away on a business trip, my husband was late at work, and Artyom offered me a ride home. All day we pretended that everything was as usual, but the tension was palpable, like electricity in the air before a thunderstorm. The car was silent. Only the occasional flash of flashlights ran across his face, his strong hands resting on the steering wheel. "You're beautiful today," he said suddenly, without turning his head. I smiled, trying to sound easy. "Today? No other days? The rest of the days are dangerously beautiful." I felt everything turn upside down inside. The car stopped in front of my house. For a few seconds we just sat there, not saying a word. "Thanks for the ride," I whispered, but I didn't move, didn't get out. He slowly turned his head and looked at me. For a long time. Deeply. And I knew that moment was the point of no return. "You feel it too," his voice was low, a little husky. I knew I had to say no. I had to cut it off at the root. I should jump out of the car, slam the door, run away to my familiar, safe life. But I didn't move. He leaned closer. And when our lips were almost touching, I closed my eyes, making a choice I shouldn't have made. It was quick, like a flash. Like a storm that blows through a city, sweeping away everything in its path. I don't remember who made the first move. Who was the first to break that fragile line? But when I came to, my fingers were entwined in his hair, my heart pounding as if it could be heard outside the house. "I'm going crazy," he whispered in my ear. "What about me? I'm already lost in the whirlwind." But the worst part wasn't even what happened. The worst part was I wasn't ashamed. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was playing with a fire that would burn everything around me. But I couldn't stop. The next morning I stood at the stove stirring coffee with a spoon, but I didn't even notice that I hadn't turned on the gas in a while. My hands were shaking. My mind was in complete chaos. The night I spent with him wouldn't let me go. It wasn't a mistake. A mistake is when something happens by accident. But what was between us couldn't have been an accident. It was a conscious, willing, crazy step into the abyss that I took without looking back. But now, standing in my kitchen, in my home that still smelled of familiar stability, I suddenly felt fear. I cheated on my husband. I betrayed my daughter. Those words cut me, leaving invisible wounds. I repeated them over and over, trying to make myself feel the shame I should have felt. But instead, I was drawn to him. To his hands, to his voice, to the way he looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. "Can't you hear me?" I flinched. My husband was standing in the doorway, stretching after his nap. "You haven't been yourself since this morning," he yawned. "Is everything all right?" I nodded and tried to smile, but the feeling of standing in a minefield didn't go away. I wanted to close my eyes and forget myself, like after a bad dream. But then the phone rang. Artyom. I wasn't even surprised. I knew he'd call. I knew we couldn't just break the thread that bound us together. "Hello," I whispered, stepping out onto the balcony, away from my husband. "Are you thinking of me?" His voice was low, mesmerizing. Artem, I squeezed the phone harder. We can't. It's too late to think about what you can and can't do, he grinned, but there was tension in his voice. You can't get it out of your head, either, can you? I was silent. I can't pretend it never happened, he continued. I can't see you next to him and just smile like I used to. I closed my eyes. We can't change anything, I said quietly. Maybe we can, his voice hardened. It's just a question of what you really want. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to say it was over. That it was a mistake I regretted. But that would be a lie. I don't want to destroy your family, he added. I grinned bitterly. Don't you see? It's already cracked. We fell silent. Somewhere inside, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of a game in which there would be no winners. But the scariest part was that I wasn't sure I wanted to stop. I thought I could hide everything. That I could lead a double life without giving away a word or a look. But Artyom shattered that illusion. He no longer wanted to be just a son-in-law. No longer could he play the part of the man who pretended as if nothing had happened. You can't pretend to be happy your whole life, he told me the last time we were alone together. I fidgeted nervously with the bracelet on my wrist, not knowing where to put my hands. Artyom. We've gone too far. It was a mistake, we both realize. Don't you dare call it a mistake, he interrupted, and there was so much anger in his voice that I flinched. Don't you understand? I need you. I felt my heart skip a beat. You want me to destroy my family? He frowned. Is it still intact? I turned back to the window. It was raining outside, thin streams of rain running down the glass as if painting the blurry outlines of my life. I knew that if I took a step in his direction, there would be no turning back. But I also knew that if I stayed, would have to carry this lie inside me for the rest of my life, smile at my husband, look into my daughter's eyes, and know that there was a secret between us that could not be told. I love you, Artyom said suddenly. I turned around sharply. Those words sounded so simple. So ordinary. So devastating. I was silent. You feel the same way, he stepped closer, taking my hand, his fingers warm, sure. All it takes is one word, and I'll drop everything. I shuddered. I could have said yes. Could have followed that desire, that passion that made her dizzy. But then I remembered Lyra's eyes. I remembered how she had laughed happily, hugging him. I remembered my husband, who was always there for me, no matter what. I closed my eyes. I don't know, I whispered. Artyom froze. I knew he wanted an answer. But I didn't have one. The choice I had to make was tearing me up inside. I could feel his hands slowly slipping from mine. Then tell me when you know, he said quietly and walked out. I was alone. With that stormy sky outside the window. The sound of the rain. With the things that can't be changed. I didn't know who to stay with. And I may never know. Write in the comments what you think about this story. Have you had similar cases in your life? What would you do if you were in the heroine's shoes? Your thoughts are very important to us and we appreciate each of you. Don't forget to subscribe and give it a like so you don't miss out on new exciting stories. May your day be light and warm. And if you've listened to the end, write in the comments, a choice that shouldn't be.